Zixra stared at her assignment details for the fifth time, her three eyes blinking in disbelief. Earth. Of all the primitive planets she could have been sent to study, it had to be Earth. The holographic display in her quarters showed images of humans engaging in what her people called courtship rituals, and she felt her scales ripple with embarrassment. This is a crucial mission, her supervisor, senior researcher Valfok, had told her earlier that day. Humans have somehow managed to maintain their population despite using the most primitive breeding methods in the known galaxy. His face tentacles had writhed with distaste as he spoke. On Zixra's homeworld, reproduction was a precise science. Genetic materials were carefully selected, combined in sterile laboratories, and new offspring were grown in specialized incubation chambers. It was efficient, logical, and completely devoid of the messy emotional attachments that humans seem to favor. Your mission, Valfok continued, is to understand how their primitive methods haven't led to their extinction. You will be disguised as one of them, attending something called a university where young humans gather to learn. And he paused, checking his notes. Fine mates. The transformation process took 3 painful hours. Zixra watched as her beautiful blue scales were hidden beneath artificial pink skin, her third eye carefully concealed, and her tentacles transformed into what humans called hair. The result was convincing, if uncomfortable. She looked like a young human female in her early 20s, which their scientists assured her was the perfect age for this study. Remember, the mission coordinator told her as she prepared for molecular transport, no emotional involvement with the subjects. Humans are known to be surprisingly charismatic. Many researchers have failed because they got too close. Zixra almost laughed. Get emotionally involved with primitives who still used physical contact and chemical reactions for reproduction. Impossible. The transport beam deposited her in what humans called New Hampshire, specifically in a small apartment near the university campus. Her new identification documents identified her as Sarah Smith, a transfer student majoring in sociology. The irony of studying human social behavior while pretending to study human social behavior wasn't lost on her. That first evening, Zixra spent hours practicing human mannerisms in front of her mirror. Smile with teeth, but not too many teeth. Blink both eyes, not one at a time like her species normally did. Walk on 2 legs without using her tail for balance. Thankfully, the transformation had taken care of that last one. She reviewed her course schedule for the upcoming semester. Introduction to Human Sexuality, Psychology of Relationships, and Cultural Anthropology. Her superiors had chosen these classes to help her better understand human mating rituals while maintaining her cover. As night fell, Zixra sat by her window, watching young humans walking in pairs, holding hands, and engaging in what her species called face-pressing, but humans romantically termed kissing. She took careful notes on her datapad, disguised as a human phone. Day 1. Humans appear to engage in physical contact long before any genetic exchange occurs. Purpose unclear, possibly some form of preliminary compatibility testing. Further research needed. What Zixra didn't write in her notes was the strange flutter in her artificial human stomach when she saw a young couple sharing what appeared to be a frozen sweet substance, both eating from the same container with separate eating utensils. Such behavior would be considered highly unsanitary on her world, yet the humans seemed to derive pleasure from it. This will be a simple research mission, she told herself firmly. Observe, document, and return home. Nothing more. She had no way of knowing just how wrong she was. Zixra's first week at the university was filled with what humans called culture shock, though in her case it was far more literal than they knew. She sat in the back of her human sexuality class, trying not to show her horror as the professor discussed human courtship rituals. Dating, as humans called it, seemed needlessly complex. They went to special locations to consume food together, watched entertainment in darkened rooms, and engaged in various recreational activities, all before even considering genetic compatibility. It was terribly inefficient. During one particularly confusing lecture, A male student caught her attention. Unlike the others who seemed to absorb the information casually, he was taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions. His name, she learned, was Mark Chen, a graduate student in biology who was sitting in on the class for his research. "Hey," he said after class, approaching her desk as she packed her unusual paper-based notes. "I noticed you seemed a bit confused during the lecture." "I'm Mark." Zixra panicked briefly, wondering if her disguise was failing. Yes, human Matt. Dating customs are very interesting." She winced at her near slip-up. "I'm Sarah." Mark smiled, and Zixra noted an odd increase in her artificial heart rate. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No," she said quickly, grateful for the built-in excuse. "I am from very far away. Different culture." "Well, if you'd like, we could get coffee sometime. I could help explain some of the cultural aspects you're studying. I'm doing my thesis on human pair bonding behaviors across cultures." Zixra nearly dropped her books. This was perfect. A human studying human mating habits could provide invaluable insights. Yes, that would be helpful for research. The next day, they met at something called the coffee shop. Zixra had been warned about coffee. Apparently, it was a mild stimulant that humans were oddly fond of. She ordered water instead, watching in fascination as Mark sipped his dark beverage. "So," Mark said, "what exactly confuses you about dating?" Zixra consulted her mental list of appropriate questions. "Why do humans spend so much time selecting mates? Why not just evaluate genetic compatibility and proceed with reproduction?" Mark choked on his coffee, though his eyes showed amusement rather than offense. "Wow, you really are direct, aren't you? Well, humans are complex. We're not just looking for genetic compatibility. We want emotional connection, shared interests, compatible life goals." "But how do shared interests affect reproductive success?" Zixra asked, genuinely puzzled. "It's not just about reproduction," Mark explained patiently. "We're looking for partners to share our lives with, someone to talk to support us, to make us laugh. Haven't you ever felt drawn to someone just because they make you happy?" Zixra started to say no, but then she noticed how Mark's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he used his hands when he talked, how he listened to her strange questions without judgment. Something uncomfortable stirred in her chest. "I need to document these findings," she said quickly, pulling out her disguised data pad. Mark laughed. "You know, Sarah, not everything needs to be documented. Sometimes you just need to experience things." As if to demonstrate, he offered her a sip of his coffee. Zixra stared at the cup, remembering her observation of the couple sharing frozen treats. According to her research, sharing food and drinks was a sign of trust in human culture. Carefully, she took the cup and sipped. The bitter liquid was shocking to her taste buds, but Mark's warm smile made the experience strangely pleasant. That night, her research report was shorter than usual. Human courtship practices may serve purposes beyond simple mate selection. Further investigation required. She didn't mention that she had saved Mark's contact information in her communicator, or that she had agreed to meet him again. After all, it was just for research, wasn't it? Zixra sat in her apartment, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing her research data. None of it made sense. According to every scientific measure her people used, humans should be failing at reproduction. Their methods were random, inefficient, and hopelessly contaminated by emotional variables. Computer, display success rates of human pair bonding versus controlled reproduction, she commanded. The numbers floating before her were impossible. Despite their primitive methods, humans had a population of billions. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. More surprisingly, their pair-bonded offspring showed higher success rates in multiple areas compared to her own species' carefully controlled breeding programs. Her communicator buzzed. It was Mark, asking if she wanted to join him for something called the movie night. She had already spent far more time with him than needed for research, but For scientific observation, she told herself firmly, sending back a positive response. When she arrived at Mark's apartment, she found him in the kitchen making something that filled the air with an enticing aroma. "I'm making popcorn," he explained, seeing her curious expression. "Can't have a proper movie night without it." They sat on his couch, and Mark started the movie, a human entertainment about space exploration. Zixra found herself fascinated, not by the highly inaccurate depiction of space travel, but by how close she and Mark were sitting. "Is this normal distance for movie viewing?" she asked, trying to sound scientific. Mark laughed. "There's no normal distance, Sarah. Just sit however feels comfortable." Comfortable. That was the problem. She was feeling far too comfortable. When their hands accidentally touched in the popcorn bowl, she felt that strange flutter in her stomach again. Her species didn't have these reactions. They didn't share food, didn't sit close together in darkened rooms, didn't feel their pulse quicken at simple skin contact. Later that night, writing her report, Zixra struggled to maintain her usual clinical tone. Subject continues to display behaviors that defy scientific explanation. Close physical proximity appears to trigger physiological responses that... She paused, deleting the line. How could she explain these responses to her superiors when she couldn't explain them to herself? The next day, in her cultural anthropology class, the professor discussed how human parents invested significant time and resources in raising children together. On her world, offspring were raised by specialized caretakers. It was more efficient that way. But as she reviewed her data, she noticed something striking. Human children raised by bonded pairs showed higher emotional stability, better social adaptation, and stronger problem-solving skills. "Your reports are becoming erratic," her supervisor's message blinked on her screen that evening. "Your latest data suggests you're developing emotional bias. Remember, you're there to study them, not become one of them." Zixra started to send her usual precise response, but stopped. How could she explain that what she was discovering wasn't just about reproduction? It was about connection, about two beings choosing to face life together, about creating something greater than simple genetic combination. Her door chimed. It was Mark, holding what he called a care package, because she had mentioned feeling confused earlier. "Sometimes when you're trying to understand something," he said, setting down a bag of various human comfort foods, "you need to stop analyzing and just feel." Looking at him, Zixra realized her data wasn't just inconsistent, it was incomplete. Her species had removed all the variables they couldn't measure, but in doing so, had they missed something essential? She needed to understand more. For science, she told herself. But as Mark smiled at her, she wasn't sure if she was convincing even herself anymore. Zixra stared at the formal warning message glowing on her screen with all three of her eyes. The one remained hidden beneath her human disguise. Her superior, Valthok, was not happy. "Your last 3 reports show clear signs of emotional contamination," the message read. "Phrases like beautiful expression of connection and remarkable depth of human bonding have no place in scientific documentation. You have 7 Earth days to show improvement, or we will terminate your mission." She closed the message just as her phone buzzed. It was Mark. "My cousin's getting married this weekend. Want to be my +1? Great chance to observe human pair bonding rituals." Zixra hesitated. A wedding would provide excellent research data, but spending more time with Mark was exactly what her superior had warned against. Still, for science, she found herself in something called a church 2 days later, watching in fascination as humans gathered to celebrate a pair bonding ceremony. Mark sat beside her, explaining things in whispers. "The white dress is traditional," he said quietly. "And watch, everyone cries at weddings. Happy tears." True to his word, when the couple exchanged what humans called vows, many guests began leaking water from their eyes. Zixra was startled to feel moisture in her own artificial tear ducts. "These vows," she whispered to Mark, "they promise impossible things. Nobody can guarantee forever." Mark smiled softly. It's not about guarantees. It's about intention and commitment, about choosing someone every day. The celebration afterward was even more fascinating. Humans dancing, sharing food and drinks, telling stories about the couple. Zixra watched an elderly pair, still holding hands after what she learned was 50 Earth years of marriage. "Want to dance?" Mark asked, holding out his hand. "I don't know how," she admitted. "Neither do I," he laughed. "We'll figure it out together." As they swayed awkwardly to the music, Zixra felt that now familiar flutter in her stomach. For a moment, she forgot about her mission, her superior's warning, even her disguise. It felt nice. Then her communicator buzzed. A priority message from Valthok. "Emergency inspection tomorrow. Your emotional contamination must be evaluated in person." Panic seized her. Valthok would surely discover her growing feelings for Mark. Worse, he might decide to erase Mark's memories of her entirely, as was standard procedure for compromised missions. "Sarah, are you okay?" Mark asked, noticing her distress. "You look pale." "I need some air," she managed, hurrying outside. In the cool evening air, Zixra tried to think logically. She could deny her feelings, write a perfectly clinical report about human wedding ceremonies, and save her mission. But as she heard the music and laughter from inside, as she remembered the elderly couple's intertwined hands, and the way the bride and groom had looked at each other. "Hey," Mark's voice came from behind her. "Whatever's wrong, we can figure it out together." Together. Such a simple word, yet it held everything her species had decided was unnecessary. Looking at Mark's concerned face, Zixra made a decision that would either save or doom her mission. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you. About where I'm really from." Just then, her communicator flashed red. Valthok wasn't coming tomorrow. He was already here. Valthok materialized in the shadows of the church garden, his human disguise already in place. To anyone else, he looked like a stern older man in a business suit. But Zixra could see past it, could sense the anger radiating from her superior. "I was going to tell him," Zixra said quickly, stepping between Valthok and Mark. "Tell me what?" Mark asked, looking confused. "Sarah, what's going on?" Valthok's voice was cold. "Subject shows signs of emotional attachment. Mission compromised. Recommended action. Immediate extraction and memory wipe of the human." But before he could act, Zixra pulled out her datapad. "Wait, look at my latest findings. The data. It changes everything we thought we knew." She projected a holographic display, forgetting in her excitement that Mark was watching. Charts and alien symbols floated in the air between them. "What the?" Mark stepped back, eyes wide. "Human pair bonding isn't primitive at all," Zixra continued quickly. "The emotional connections they form release specific hormones that strengthen genetic expression. Their children show higher adaptability, stronger immune responses, and better cognitive development compared to our controlled methods." Valthok frowned. "Impossible." "Look at the numbers. When humans choose their mates based on emotional compatibility, their offspring show a 47% increase in survival traits. They're not just reproducing. They're evolving, growing stronger with each generation." Mark, recovering from his shock, stepped forward. "You're aliens? Studying human relationships?" "Yes," Zixra admitted. "I was sent to study your primitive breeding methods. But what I found..." She turned to him, dropping her human disguise for the first time. "What I found was that love isn't a weakness. It's an evolutionary advantage." Mark stared at her true form, blue scales, 3 eyes, and all, for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed. "You know, this explains why you asked if hand-holding was a preliminary genetic compatibility test." Valthok watched their interaction with growing interest. The human shows no fear, no rejection of your true form. Fascinating. "That's exactly my point," Zixra said excitedly. Humans form bonds based on deeper connections than just physical or genetic compatibility. They see past surface differences. They choose to stay together even when it's difficult, and that commitment itself creates stronger offspring. She pulled up more data. Look at these brain scans. When bonded humans interact, their neural patterns synchronize. They literally change each other's biology through emotional connection. Our sterile reproduction methods can't replicate these effects. Valthok studied the data in silence. Finally, he spoke. Your research methods were unorthodox, but your findings cannot be ignored. This requires further study. I volunteer to continue the research, Mark said, stepping closer to Zixra. I am a biologist after all, and clearly I'm already involved. Zixra felt that now familiar flutter, stronger than ever. You're not disturbed by what I am. Sarah, or Zixra, you're still you. The same person who got excited about wedding traditions and confused about popcorn. This is just a lot more interesting than I expected. Valthok looked between them, seeing something that had eluded their species for generations. Perhaps, he said slowly, we have been the primitive ones, thinking we could improve reproduction by removing emotion from the equation. As wedding music drifted out from the church, Zixra realized she had discovered something far more important than she'd been sent to find. She discovered that love, in all its inefficient emotional glory, might just be the most advanced evolutionary strategy of all. Now she just had to convince her entire species of that fact. Word of Zixra's discovery spread quickly through the alien scientific community. Within days, her small apartment near campus had become the center of an interstellar debate. Holographic projectors showed dozens of alien scientists arguing about her findings. This is nonsense, declared Chief Researcher Zonth, his three eyes glowing with anger. Humans are primitive. Their method of reproduction is chaotic and unreliable. Mark sat on Zixra's couch, watching the floating alien faces with fascination. Over the past week, he'd been helping her defend her research, offering a human perspective that the alien scientists found both disturbing and intriguing. If we're so primitive, Mark asked, standing up, then why does your species have a declining birth rate while humans continue to thrive? The alien scientists buzzed with angry whispers. No one had expected the human to speak so boldly. Our methods are perfect, Zonth insisted. We select only the best genetic matches. We control every variable. Zixra pulled up her latest data. But that's exactly the problem. Look at these results. Human children raised by emotionally bonded parents show remarkable adaptability. They're better at solving problems, handling stress, and forming their own relationships. And what about this? Mark added, pointing to another chart. Couples who choose each other based on emotional connection have children with stronger immune systems than those matched purely for genetic compatibility. The debate raged for hours. Some scientists started to see the logic in Zixra's findings. Others, like Zonth, grew more hostile. This research must be stopped, Zonth finally declared. The human must be memory wiped, and Zixra must return for retraining. Zixra felt cold fear grip her heart. She knew what retraining meant. They would erase everything she had learned, everything she had felt. She looked at Mark, who had become so much more than just a research subject. No, she said firmly. I won't let you erase him. My research is valid. Humans have something we lost long ago, when we decided emotions were unnecessary. You're contaminated with human emotions, Zonth shouted. Guards, prepare for emergency extraction. But Valthok, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. Wait. As senior researcher, I demand a full review. Zixra's findings, while unconventional, merit further study. 3 alien guards had already materialized in the apartment. They moved toward Mark, their memory wipe devices humming. Stop. Zixra jumped between them and Mark. If you erase his memories, you'll only prove what my research shows, that our species has become so afraid of emotions that we'd rather destroy evidence than face the truth. Mark put his hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Sixra. Let them try. Because even if they erase my memories, they can't erase what you've discovered. Love isn't just an emotion. It's an evolutionary strategy that's helped humans survive and thrive for thousands of years. The guards hesitated, looking at Valthok for direction. He's right, Valthok said thoughtfully. Perhaps it's time our species learned from those we considered primitive. Zonth, stand down your guards. Zonth's hologram flickered with rage. This isn't over. The High Council will hear about this. Contamination. As the holograms and guards disappeared, leaving them alone, Zix returned to Mark. I'm sorry I put you in danger. Mark smiled. Are you kidding? This is the most exciting research project I've ever been part of. Besides, he took her hand. I think we've discovered something much more important than either of our species expected. Looking at their joined hands, one human, one alien, Zixra realized that sometimes the biggest scientific breakthroughs came not from controlling variables, but from letting them run free. Now they just had to convince the High Council of that fact. The High Council chamber was nothing like what Mark had imagined. Instead of a sterile white room, it was a vast space filled with swirling colors and floating platforms. He stood beside Zixra, the only human ever to present to the Alien Council. Members of the High Council, Zixra began, her voice steadied despite her nervousness. What you're about to see will change everything we thought we knew about reproduction and evolution. The council members, 12 ancient beings with shimmering scales and multiple eyes, watched as she displayed her research. Images of human families, brain scans, and data charts filled the air around them. For generations, we believed our methods were superior, she continued. We removed emotion from reproduction, thinking it made us more advanced. We were wrong. A murmur went through the council. Mark squeezed her hand supportively. Look at this human couple. She projected an image of the elderly pair from the wedding. 50 years together. Their children show remarkable genetic stability. Their grandchildren demonstrate enhanced cognitive abilities, all because of something we dismissed as primitive: love. Love is not measurable, one council member objected. It cannot be controlled or replicated. Mark stepped forward. That's exactly what makes it powerful. Love adapts. It grows. It makes us want to be better, to try harder, to survive against impossible odds. You can't control it, but you can learn from it. Zixra pulled up her final piece of evidence, a comparison between her own brain scans from before and after meeting Mark. The changes were dramatic. My neural patterns have evolved more in months of emotional connection than our species typically sees in decades. We didn't just discover how humans reproduce successfully. We discovered how they evolve through connection. The council chambers fell silent. Even Zonth, who had been summoned to defend the traditional methods, seemed unable to argue with the evidence. Finally, the head council member spoke. In all our years of scientific advancement, we never considered that emotions might serve a biological purpose. Perhaps it is we who need to evolve. The decision was unanimous. Not only would Zixra's research be accepted, but she would lead a new department studying the connection between emotional bonds and genetic expression. And more surprisingly, they wanted Mark to help. You'll be the first human-alien scientific partnership in history, Valthok told them proudly. Though I suspect you're already more than just research partners. Months later, Zixra's people began their first experiments in emotion-inclusive reproduction. It wasn't easy. Centuries of clinical detachment couldn't be undone overnight. But slowly, they started to remember how to feel. Mark and Zixra continued their research together, splitting their time between Earth and her home world. They discovered that love wasn't just a human trait. It was a universal force that had been waiting to be rediscovered. You know what's funny? Mark said one evening as they watched a sunset from their lab's observation deck. Your people sent you to study our primitive methods, but you ended up teaching them the most advanced evolutionary strategy in the galaxy. letting your heart lead the way. Zixra smiled, her 3 eyes shining with emotion she no longer tried to hide. Maybe that's the real discovery. The most powerful science isn't about controlling everything. Sometimes it's about letting go and seeing what grows. Below them, in the nursery section of their new research facility, the first generation of emotionally bonded alien children was already showing signs of unprecedented development. They were stronger, more adaptable, and more emotionally intelligent than any before them. Love, it turned out, wasn't just a human weakness. It was the next step in evolution for all species, and it had taken a curious alien scientist and a patient human teacher to prove it.